on you?
I can't see you.
You're on. You're on.
I can see.
You're on.
Good evening. For those of you that are on Zoom, glad that you're there and glad we could talk just a little bit a few minutes ago. For those of you that are on Restream and Facebook and YouTube, we're glad that you're with us wherever you happen to be. I'm going to continue what I started Sunday, and it's kind of a negative start, which sometimes I do that. The title was, My Goal is Not Your Fun, but my goal is really your abundant life. And this is part 2, but I'm going to backtrack just a little bit and maybe say something that might be a little bit contrary to what I just said. But I think there was a gentleman by the name of Mark Twain years ago that said that rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated, or something to that extent. And seriously, this past week we heard that some had heard that I had died. And as any of you that are watching can tell, or listening either way, you know that if I'm dead, well, I'm at least making a very good effort at acting like I'm alive. But I'm not dead, and I'm thankful that I'm not. And if you've heard that, I don't know whether somebody else passed away that carries the name Robert, but it wasn't me if it was. And so I'm glad to be here. And I hope that the time that we spend together this evening will contribute to not you having fun, because I'm not really interested in that, but in having an abundant life. And we started out Sunday, the Lord Jesus Christ himself said, I'm come that you might have life, that you might have it more abundantly. And there's a word that when I begin to think along this line, it seems to me that as we go through life, as life continues on, our culture is increasingly hedonistic. In other words, it's as I understand that word, you look it up, it's defined as engaged in the pursuit of pleasure, sensual, self-indulgent, and then it uses as a use of the word hedonistic existence of drink, drugs, and parties. And there's an awful lot of people in our society that's really what they would like for it to be all the time, it seems like. To ponder, to reflect, to meditate, to think about life and death and the hereafter. They're not really into that. They don't want to do that. They want to engage in the pursuit of pleasure. Sensually self-indulgent people. And when I look it up in a dictionary, I get a whole stack of synonyms for hedonistic, and it starts out with self-indulgent, indulgent, pleasure-seeking, pleasure-loving, sybaritic, lotus-eating, Epicurean, luxurious, unrestrained, intemperate, immoderate, overindulgent, excessive, extravagant, fast-living, sensual, voluptuous, and decadent. And all of those words are the only one that I didn't have a clue when I read it. What it means was the word sybaritic, and I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it right. But I looked it up, and it says it's a word that means to be fond of sensuous luxury or pleasure, to be a self-indulgent person, an opulent person, to live a sybaritic lifestyle, to live that kind of lifestyle. That's what our culture really, for many people, is all about. And for those of us who have been for the last year, basically living in a lockdown, stay at home, travel no place, actually instruction or exhortation that we received, because you're afraid of a virus called the COVID-19 virus. People that are concerned or have been afraid and locked down, a lot of them have become increasingly self-indulgent. Child abuse has increased, immorality has increased, spousal abuse has increased. There's a lot of side effects to people sitting around at home with nothing to do, apparently, that will occupy their time and their interest. Uh, I hope that those of you who are here who know the Lord Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, you didn't find yourself engaging in those activities to excess. And I hope that each of us, as we maybe have had, some of us more time. I don't feel like I've had any more time. I've had, I think, if anything, less time. And I really don't know that I've traveled a whole lot less. And I'm really not afraid of the COVID-19 virus. That doesn't mean I couldn't get it. It doesn't mean it couldn't kill me. It doesn't mean that I don't realize that. But I don't find that a fearful thing. And I don't really believe it's quite that dangerous. But so I can't relate to myself having been, I've been pushing hard or harder on almost every front that I have things going on. And so I'm not trying to figure out what to do with my time. I'm still trying to figure out how to get things done that I need to get done, and I'm still running behind on almost everything that I try to do. So I'm not been in that situation. But I said as I was closing out Sunday that there was a man, when I think about that kind of lifestyle, when I think of what so many people today believe, that if they could just get the next car or the next raise or the next bit more money, if their wife or husband could just get a better job and they had more money and they could travel more and they could vacation more, and that they would be happy, or at least happier. And yet that's really not true. And early in my life, physical life, I became acquainted with a man by the name of Solomon in the Bible. He became a king over the nation Israel. And he was a man, as sad to say so many are when they're young, that when he was first anointed and crowned king of the nation Israel, he was a pretty humble person. And he seemed to see things pretty well as far as the values and the important things and the challenges that he faced in his life. And so when in 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 7, the Lord gave him an option. Actually, verse 6, the Lord gave him the option. He said, if you'd like something, anything you ask, I'll give it to you. And a lot of people think that if they could just have such an opportunity to do that, anything that I would ask. Some people would say, I'd like to win the lottery. Some people would say, I'd like to have $1 million. Other people, maybe if they were more realistic, might ask for $1 billion. Some people would want good health. Some people would want maybe a husband or a wife, or a lot of things that people would hope for that they think would bring them happiness that probably wouldn't. Because happiness and joy, or as I mentioned Sunday, love, joy, and peace, which I think are the major characteristics of the abundant life, they don't come from things. They don't come from money. They don't come from pleasures, physical pleasure that we can have, doing something, watching something, participating in something. Basically, it's pretty well true that if you're not happy where you are today, you probably wouldn't be happy regardless of what else you could buy or get or have. In fact, I've known people that were leaving this life and were anticipating leaving this life in death, and they were not unhappy as people. They had love and joy and peace. And yet, for most people, that's the thing that they're most afraid of. But Solomon, when God told him, whatever you ask, I'll give it to you, Solomon thinks about it, and then he asks the Lord, he said, now, O Lord, this is the 3rd chapter of 1 Kings chapter, and verse 7, the 7th verse of the 3rd chapter of 1 Kings. He says, now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David. That's about the top of the stratus or the top of the rung or the top of the ladder in the structure of people, whether king is the form of government you have, that's about the most powerful person. Most of the one who can tell people to go and they go, and come and they come, and somebody to live and they do, and somebody to die and they do. And so sometimes people get pretty proud and cocky and smart aleck and think they know it all just because they've achieved that status, but he didn't. And so after telling him, Lord, you've made your servant king instead of my father, he says, but I'm a little child. He wasn't really a little child in that he was a baby, but as far as his experience in life and his knowledge and wisdom and experience as it related to the challenge of being the king of the nation Israel, he didn't have it wired, and he knew it. And he said, I don't know how to go out, and I don't know how to come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you've chosen, a great people. There were large people, great quantity of people. Great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore, give your servant. This is what he wants for his, whatever you wish, you can have it. Therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? I think most people would think that's not, I mean, if you were writing a novel or something like that, you wouldn't put that as the wish that a person had who had just become king. It's kind of different. It's good. It's positive. But it certainly isn't the norm, we would say. And so in verse 10 of chapter 3 of 1 Kings, we read, the speech pleased the Lord. Well, that's one of the things that I hope and pray whenever I speak, is that the things that I say will please the Lord, will be honoring to the Lord, will be encouraging to saints, or in some cases maybe will convict saints, but that it'll be conducive to them having an abundant life. And so we read the speech pleased the Lord, that Solomon had asked this thing. And then God said to him, because you have asked this thing and have not asked for long life for yourself, that's what many people would have asked for, nor have asked riches for yourself, nor have asked the life of your enemies. In other words, what Solomon asked for was something that would be in the best interest of everybody that was under his control, everybody that he was ruling over, everyone that lived in the nation Israel and that he was the king of. And so you didn't ask for something selfish like a long life, or something selfish like riches for yourself, or something selfish like the death of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Behold, I have done according to your words. So consistent with what God had told him he would do, he did too. And Solomon is going to have a wise and an understanding heart. But God doesn't stop there. He goes on. He says, behold, I've done according to your words. I've given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. That's a pretty wise guy, smart guy. And I don't mean wise guy in a sarcastic sense. I mean a wise person. Nobody before you, nobody after you is going to be blessed with the wisdom that you have. And so Solomon, I'm sure, was grateful for that. He appreciated that. But that wasn't the end. God wasn't through. And so in verse 13, he said, and I have also, God speaking, I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. There won't be anyone like you. You're good. You're good. He really is. You know, a lot of times we think we know a lot about something, a particular subject, or we have a lot of authority or a lot of power, or because we have a position among people, human beings, of authority or power or respect, that we are somebody, something to be dealt with. But it isn't necessarily so, just because we have a place of respect among people. But I've given you what you have not asked, riches and honor. There shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. So if you walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. And he's not asking Solomon to live perfectly, a perfect life, a perfect lifestyle, always be right, never make a bad call in his own life, or never lust after something that he didn't need. And actually, in drawing the parallel between King David and King Solomon, David didn't do everything perfectly either. And yet he was a man after God's own heart. And when he was faced with his sin, he acknowledged his sin and asked God to forgive him. And he had to deal with the consequences of his sin. But what God was wanting is Solomon to have a heart that even though it failed, that he confessed and forsook, and God could be faithful and just to forgive him his sins, and still look upon him as a human being after God's own heart. I'm not going to go far with it, but the sad thing is that if we were to follow Solomon's life to the end, he didn't do that. And he violated some basic instructions given by God to all of Israel, and some instructions given by God specifically to kings. And he took from among the nations, pagan wives, and they turned his heart against God. But he still was the wisest man, had miraculous wisdom, and also was a very wealthy, prosperous, prominent man. And that's why when you talk about the things that we might think, if we just had this, or if we just had that, or if we just had the other, Solomon is the guy that could try it all. And he did. He was certainly a lot wiser and knowledgeable than I am. He certainly had much more authority than I would ever have in a nation of people, to say nothing of even my brothers and sisters in Christ. And yet, he didn't walk true to the Lord. But then in verse 15 we read, Solomon awoke, and indeed it had been a dream, and he came to Jerusalem, and he stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and he offered burnt offerings, he offered peace offerings, and he made a feast for all of his servants. So Solomon begins to function as the king of Israel with a commitment to God and a commitment from God, and in offering sacrifices that were to ceremonially cleanse him of his sins under the Mosaic law. And he was a man that would have power and authority, and who would be respected and awed. Other kings would be in awe of him, and he wrote a lot of proverbs and a lot of instructions, and he tried everything that he could find under the sun that people generally try to find happiness, including having fun. And there was no limit to what he could have done that we can do as people that we might consider as fun. There's no limit to what he could have done. And so what I get when I read and study and meditate on Solomon's life is If he couldn't find happiness in quantity or quality of the things that people think will make them happy, that are fun, or that are part of wisdom, and we'll take the time this evening to go through it, because to me it's, my mind goes back a lot of times to the scriptures that we're going to look at tonight. When I think about, well, if I just had this, well, if I just could do that, well, I wish, and I'm like everybody else, I'm inclined to do that, but the answer is real simple. It's not in that area that we're able to find and have an abundant life. In the area of fun, in the area of recreation, in the area of acquiring things. That's not where it is. It's in the area of our relationship with God and our relationship with other people that is a godly relationship that we find an abundant life. And it's interesting and amazing how many people that really don't spend much time reading the Bible, but they know a little bit about this next story. But he was tested pretty quickly, Solomon was. And again, still in chapter 3 and verse 16, after Solomon had gone to Jerusalem, stood before the Ark of the Covenant, offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and made a feast for his servants, 2 women came before him, who the text says were harlots. And they came to the king, and they stood before him. And one of the women said, "O my lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house. And I gave birth while she was in the house." And then I don't know. We don't have a lot more information about the 2 women. As far as I know, we don't have any more than what we have right here. But obviously, the activity or the trade that they were involved in, if there wasn't something done to prevent it, would cause them to become pregnant if they were reasonably healthy people. And apparently they were. And for both of them to be expecting a child, probably not too surprising. And for one of them to give birth to a child a little bit ahead of the other one would not be surprising either, probably. But as the woman is talking, she said it happened on the 3rd day. So these are little babies that are 3 days old. After I have given birth, that this woman also gave birth, and we were together, and no one was with us in the house except the 2 of us in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night, and she took my son from my side while your maidservant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and she laid her dead child in my bosom. Well, that's kind of, quite a story. You could challenge, why in the world did you sleep? I guess the first question would be, why would the one sleep so soundly that she rolled on her child and killed it? And the other was, how could the other sleep so soundly that a woman could take her baby that was alive and slip the body of another baby in bed with her, and she not be awakened? You could ask questions like that. Solomon could have taken him for, look, if you 2 ladies have behaved yourselves and not been involved in what you're involved in, as far as your career, if you want to call it that, you wouldn't have this problem. But Solomon didn't dispatch it that way. He felt that he could help with the situation, and so he listens. He lets them tell their story. And so the woman that's making the appeal says, when I arose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was dead. But when I examined him in the morning, indeed, he was not my son, whom I had born. Then the other woman said, no, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son. And the first woman said, no, the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. And so Solomon has the challenge of making a call here. because apparently there was an accidental death. Nobody's murdered anybody. Might have been manslaughter, but nobody murdered anybody. And the story of the one woman is that her baby was alive, and the other woman's baby that died, she had been traded with her baby. She'd been exchanged. They'd been exchanged during the middle of the night. And then when she woke up, the baby that she had that was dead was not really her baby. It was her friend's baby. And they go back and forth. No, it's you. No, it's you. No, it's mine. The lie was mine. No, the lie was mine. And Solomon has to make a call. Because oftentimes you wind up in situations where you do have to make a call. And so Solomon, I don't know how long he thought about it or meditated about it, or whether the solution that he felt would, or the action that he thought would bring out the truth from the two women. I don't know whether that came to him immediately. I would assume that God revealed it to him at whatever point that it was revealed to him. And so the king said, in verse 23 of 1 Kings 3, the one says, this is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one. And the other says, no, your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one. There's no witnesses. There's no other adults that we know of in the house that could shed light on the subject. So Solomon says, the king said, verse 24, bring me a sword. And so they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two and give half to one and half to the other. Now, somebody that heard that, you might gasp and think, oh, that's a terrible, terrible idea. How in the world how could our king come up with an idea like that? And yet it really wasn't. It really was pretty wise. About one of that, something like that is the only way he probably would ever get to the bottom of it. And so he says, bring me a sword and cut the child in half and give one to each one of them. And so then he's going to be watching for the response or the reaction of the two women to see if their response is consistent. If there's a difference in their response, if they both said, yeah, do it that way, probably wouldn't make much difference which way it went. But one of them is going to react like a mother, and the other one is going to react like a kidnapper. And so the one, in verse 26, the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with compassion for her son. The one that knew that it wasn't her son, she knew it wasn't her son. She knew that she had kidnapped her friend's son. She knew that she was a liar. She didn't have really a mother's love for that child. Not that she didn't have a mother's love for the other one, but that she didn't solve anything by taking her friend's child. But the mother had compassion, and as you think about it, you say, well, of course the mother's going to react in whatever way it takes to save the son's life. And generally when you work with a king, you don't have a lot of recourse to appeal the judgment, things happen in a pretty timely way. And so she yearned with compassion for her son and said, "O my Lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him." But the other said, "Let him be neither mine nor yours, but divide him." Would you have any trouble making a call as to who was the mother of the child? I don't. The guilt, I think, the degree of guilt is beyond reasonable doubt. They look for in a court of law. I think that the two women demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt who was the mother. because the mother was willing to give up half so that the child could live whole. And the one who wasn't the mother was willing to take half so that her, I guess she would have been jealous of her friend who had a living son. It's kind of sordid the way human nature works, but that's the way human nature works. And so the woman that kidnapped her friend's son, she said, no, neither one of us have it. Just go ahead, cut him in half. So the king answered and said, give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother. She's his mother. That's wisdom, really. That's wisdom. And you know, you may think about it, because years ago when I first read it, I thought, well, yeah, wouldn't you expect that to be what would happen? Well, wouldn't anybody? Yeah, but I don't know whether I'd have come up with that as the means to try to resolve the problem at that point in time. I don't know that I would have. Pretty sure, well, I don't know. When I first read the story, I'm pretty sure I probably wouldn't have. Now that I've read the story, if I had a similar situation arise, I would probably use a similar approach, but that wouldn't reflect on anything other than the wisdom that was imparted to me by reading what wisdom God had given to Solomon. But he was a wise man, and he didn't much more start out to be a king than he was put to the test, and he passed the test very well. I'm going to look at the book of Ecclesiastes probably for the rest of our time this evening. But biblically, as far as I know, Solomon was the wisest man on earth. And he had the opportunity to try anything and everything that was available for people to enjoy, to have fun, to be entertained, to be distracted, to waste time, to anything he had the ability to accomplish. And he seemed to experiment with that, if I can put it that way, in such a way as to be able to say, okay, you don't find fun here, or fun here doesn't solve the problem. Fun isn't what you're looking for. That's not where you're going to find peace. That's not where you're going to find love. That's not where you're going to find joy. That's not where you're going to find happiness. So if we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 1, we read the words of the preacher, the son of David, the king of Jerusalem. So Solomon is the preacher. He's the son of David. He's the king of Jerusalem. And he's going to look at life, and there's an expression that's repeatedly in the book, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun. I saw it by wisdom. I saw it by understanding. And so he's looking at it, and he's saying, okay, based on everything that I can tell, with the wisdom, supernatural wisdom that I have from God, these things that we're often inclined to pursue, that we call fun or recreation, as a means of having happiness and success in our life, they won't do it. They won't do it. And my suggestion to you, and it's been clear to me, is that if he couldn't make it work, then I sure can. Because he had a lot more advantages, humanly speaking, under the sun than I will ever have. And never have had. But in the second verse he says, vanity of vanities, or it's vain, it's worthless, it's useless, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? Just looking at all things as they are, what's the benefit? One generation passes away, another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But the sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to its place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south and turns around to the north, and the wind whirls about continually, and it comes again on its circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. And all things are full of labor. All things are full of labor, and man cannot express it. We live in a time right now, and when it seems like those that rule in our countries, various countries, are doing everything they can to make their citizenry afraid of something. And I understand it to be so that we will look to them, the rulers of our countries, as the solution to our fear, our problem that we anticipate, or they anticipate, or they tell us that it's going to happen. And I've said many times that there's a lot of things in the scripture that cause me to believe without any doubt that nothing that mankind does to this planet is going to cause it to become inhabitable. And that's what Solomon concluded. He says, but the earth abides forever. Everything comes, everything goes, times, seasons, rain, snow, rivers run into the water, everything goes back and forth. It's going to keep on. It's going to keep on. And then when he talks about the rivers all running into the sea, and yet the sea is not full, and we've got people running around today trying to tell us that we're going to all go underwater someday because we're melting the polar ice cap or something like that. No, it's okay, guys. This planet was designed by a God who had more foresight than you'll ever have. And he designed it in such a way that it'll survive just as long as he wants it to. And it'll be habitable just as long as he wants it to be inhabited. And the book tells us that when the day comes that he's through with that, it will stop being habitable. And he will change it. He will change it. And it'll be different, radically different. But it's going to be God that changes it, not the stupidity of mankind. And I think it's ridiculous to think that somehow if we stop drinking Coca-Cola out of a straw, that we won't kill off all the fish with straws. But there are people that seem to think that's the way it is, but it's not. And then at the end of that verse 7, he says, all things are full of labor, man cannot express it. He goes on to say, the eye is not satisfied with seeing. The eye is not satisfied with seeing. And the ear filled with hearing. It's not. It's not. And if you stop and think about it personally, each of us, there are all of us, the things that we have wanted to see, wanted to experience. Just curious, how could that work? Okay, so you can see it, and you can see it work maybe. And does that satisfy you? Doesn't me. It didn't take me too long to figure that out. And when I started reading this, okay, that's common. It doesn't work that way. And we want to hear things, and we want people to tell things, and we want to, and does that satisfy us? No. I mean, if you go back in the years when this country, the United States of America, was populated, a lot of people told stories about the New World and the wonderful things that were there. How many people were really satisfied with just hearing about it? No, they wanted to go. There was a time when stories began to circulate of gold in California. Was everybody happy once they heard the stories of all the gold in California? No, they wanted to go, and they did. And that happens over and over. There's gold rushes and oil rushes, and I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong with that at times, but I'm just saying, but that doesn't really satisfy people. You don't want to just hear about it. You don't want to just see it. You want to participate for the most part. And Solomon had the ability to participate in anything he wanted to participate, and yet he concluded that it's all vanity and vexation of spirit. In verse 9, he goes on, that which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. I've enjoyed listening to a speaker. Hanson is his last name. And was raised in a farm family in Central California. And he's talked about how at times he's a historian and he's a writer and part of a think tank and all that kind of stuff. And he speaks very clearly and seems to be a reasonably humble guy. And he talks about how the fact that when you look back at history, everything goes around and it keeps coming around. And we see something new coming on and we think it's never been this bad. But if you really knew what was going on way back here in history, it went around this same barn. And it was all new to them. But if you could go back further enough, there were those that had done the same thing before. It just goes around. And I've thought a lot of times, because I think that it's very apropos today, that a lot of people think, oh, this is new, life is different, the world is different, morals are different, attitude toward God is different, attitude toward races and colors and skin colors and languages and all that's all different. No, it's not different. Not a bit different. If anything, at this particular time in the United States, some of the feelings against people based on color, skin, nationality, language, background, country is probably more neutral today in the United States than at any time in the history of man. But that's probably not true, because there probably was some time way back in the history of man when it was like it is today. And that's really what Solomon is saying. That which is done is what will be done. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there's nothing new under the sun. He's not talking about technology. He's not talking about iPhones. He's talking about men, women, and people, and the way we relate, and what we're looking for, and the desires of our heart, and the needs that we feel, and the Adamic nature that we have to deal with. That's what he's talking about. It just goes round and round. In verse 10 he says, is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. And in verse 11 he says, there's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come. We don't remember what happened that's going to happen, and when it happens again, we're not going to remember it. Those who move on, we're not going to remember it again. Nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. It just goes round and round. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. So now he's going to bring it back to, okay, here I am. I'm the king over Jerusalem. I'm the king of Israel in Jerusalem. And I set my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. In other words, it wasn't just accidental, it wasn't casual observation, but Solomon made a study of it. I set my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom. He's not talking about revelation from God necessarily. It's just by the facts of life, the way things come together, the way things have happened, what happens when you do this and that and the other, and what do you gain or lose? How much do you remember or don't remember? I, the preacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. And this burdensome task God has given to the sons of men, by which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun. And he could see them all. And indeed, all is vanity and grasping for the wind. All is vanity and grasping for the wind. What are you talking about? Solomon? Well, in verse 15 he says, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. all the things that need to be fixed or changed, and there's so many things you can't even count them. I communed in my heart saying, look, I've attained unto greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly, and I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. So in other words, joy and peace and love are not the byproduct of fun. Or more specifically, as what he stated, they're not the byproduct of wisdom, knowledge, mirth, and he'll go on in the text to say wine, and acquiring all kinds of things that a king could acquire who had unlimited resources. I set my heart to know wisdom, to know madness and folly, and I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. In other words, madness and folly, as I understand it, would fall into the word, or under the word, or in harmony with the word fun. Things that are fun. Laughing, joking, cutting up, horseplay. It's all grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief. In other words, the more you know about really what goes on, does that make you happy? In other words, as I grew up, I was born in 1939, was schooled at home by my mother to the 4th grade, went to public school in a town called Norwalk, California, just north of where I am in San Diego. And I believed that the United States had the best form of government, that the founding fathers of the United States were honest people, that this was supposed to be a Christian country. And then I began to find out, as I grew older, that everything wasn't always as it looked like. And that while I didn't know of any crooked police in California, and I knew several people in law enforcement, and I never saw much crookedness even as I got older, and at a short period of time in my life worked for the State Department of Corrections in the state of California. I didn't see much crookedness, but that doesn't mean it wasn't going on in other states. And so the older I get and the more I know, the more knowledge, in other words, that I acquire, the more grief I have from that source. Because you come to find out that most everything that the government investigated, most everything that we were told that was the reason behind what was done, really isn't true. Really wasn't the true story. Wasn't the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I could go over a lot of specifics, but I won't. But so that's what Solomon is saying. The more I learn, the more I put all of what people grasp after, and what people try to accomplish, and the results of their efforts, and the things that need to be fixed, and the quantity of the things that need to be changed in order for things to be right that can't possibly be changed. It's just more grief. And he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. It's just the way it is. In chapter 2 he goes on, I said in my heart, and I think the interesting thing is this, that, okay, Solomon, again, he's not just coming to know these things, but he really wants to find out what is fun, or acquisition of products, or recreation, or victory in war, or whatever. Is that where peace, joy, abundant life comes from? Love, peace, and joy. I said in my heart, chapter 2, verse 1, come now, I'll test you with mirth. Well, of course, that's got to be in the category of fun. Jokers, jokesters, telling jokes, pranksters maybe, playing tricks on people. I don't know what all, but I come now, I'll test you with mirth. And therefore enjoy pleasure. And he could enjoy it. He didn't have to worry about the cost. He didn't have to worry about somebody saying what you're doing is not right. But surely, he said, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth. Those three things, laughter, madness, and mirth. What does it accomplish? This doesn't accomplish anything, you know. It's because yeah, I understand from what little I understand of history that there was a time when kings and princes and wealthy and royalty, they would have jesters that would come into their courtyard, and as I understand it, they were comedians basically. They were designed and intended to act out things, say things, put words together in such a way as to make the person that they're trying to impress, make them happy and forget about the troubles of their heart for a period of time, and it might for a period of time, but then that's all vanity because the problem is still there. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth. What does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine. So he tries laughter, madness, and mirth. And then he's going to try alcohol. And I don't know what he knew of drugs, mind-altering drugs, but if he did know, he certainly could have tried that too. And so he said, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine while guiding my heart with wisdom. In other words, he isn't going to be an alcoholic. He's not going to go out and be a skid row bum or drunk in the gutter somewhere. He's going to drink within reason. And he wants to find that high point in the exhilaration of drinking of alcohol and not go to the point where he's drunk and sick to his stomach and vomiting all over the place. So I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. How much to work, how much to drink, how much to play. I'm trying to figure out how does it work. And then he goes on to tell what he accomplished in verse 4 of chapter 2. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. And I like the first person pronouns, I think they are. I, me, made. I made, I built, I planted myself. I made myself gardens and orchard, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. Nothing wrong with those things, but if you're looking for what is going to enable you to have an abundant life, that's not where it is. That's not where it is. And then in verse 6 he continues on again on the path of acquisition of things. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove that he planted. And I acquired male and female servants, and the servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers. He didn't turn on the radio, or he didn't go to the local bar or someplace to hear people sing. He hired them. They lived with him. I acquired male and female singers. Maybe he bought them and owned them. I don't know. The delights of the sons of men and musical instruments of all kinds. So again, when you read that, I don't know how anybody can read what we're going over and think about it, meditate on it, and think, this guy tried it all. He really did try it all to the best of his ability. And he had a lot of ability that we'll never have. Verse 9 of chapter 2, so I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. He didn't become a bum. He didn't become a drunk. He didn't blow his mind with drugs or alcohol. He still maintained his wisdom. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I don't think hardly anybody can say that. that anything I wanted, anything I desired, I got it. I got it. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor. In other words, he looked at what he'd done and he was proud of his accomplishments. And this was my reward from all my labor. And then I looked at all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. It didn't produce an abundant life. It didn't do it. So he's going to turn and go another way. So instead of trying, folly and games and play, and he said, I turn myself to consider wisdom and madness and folly. He still wants to have fun. What could the man who succeeds the king, what can the man do who succeeds the king? I'm not succeeding him in that I'm a king, but I'm exceeding him in that I'm a man on the face of the earth. And he says, what can he do? Only what Solomon, only what has already been done. I've tried it all, is what I understand Solomon to be saying. You can't do something. I can't do anything that he didn't try. And I don't think any of the rest of us that are alive on the earth today can either, really. I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Yet I perceived that the same event happens to them all. The fool, the foolish, the wise, the same thing. So I said in my heart, this is chapter 2, verse 15, as it happens to the fool, it also happens to me. And why was I then more wise? In other words, I don't have, with all of my wisdom, I don't have any ability to change the natural outcome of what's going to happen. Then I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For there's no more remembrance of the wise than of the fool forever, since all that now is will be forgotten in the days to come. And how does a wise man die? As a fool, same way. And I think the next two words, I enlarge them greatly in my text, but in verse 17 of chapter 2 of Ecclesiastes, therefore I hated life. Okay, if Solomon wasn't able to acquire and do and accomplish the things that would enable a person to have an abundant life with the things that are of this life, surely none of the rest of us, at least that are aware of that, are going to waste any time trying, because we can't do it. I hated life, Solomon said. In other words, he and one of the things that they're telling us is that there's been a tremendous increase in suicides in the last year due to the COVID lockdowns. And the other thing that they tell us is that actually in the areas where people are locked down and the areas where people are not locked down, not the same number of people die. So you say, what are we accomplishing? It's not a proven fact that whatever efforts they've told us to do, wash our hands and wear masks and stay locked down, that's prevented anybody from getting it, really, percentage-wise. Therefore, I hated life. A lot of people are committing suicide because the work that was done under the sun was distressing me. For all is vanity and grasping for the wind, and then I hated all my labor in which I had toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he'll be wise or a fool. And we're all going to leave it behind. Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, in which I've shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired. The pressure, the pain of trying to find an abundant life through things, activities, acquisitions. Solomon says, I despaired of life. I hated life. This also is vanity. I despaired of all the labor in which I had toiled under the sun. It doesn't pay, he said. And then going on in verse 21 of chapter 2, and I'll close out here in just a little bit. But for there's a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill. Yet he leaves his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and great evil. For what has man of all of his labor for the striving of his heart, which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, and his work burdensome. Even in the night his heart takes no rest. This also is vanity. Nothing is better for a man that he should eat and drink, that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. Okay, so in other words, back off and quit trying to acquire an abundant life by the amount of things and the activities you can be involved in and the things that you can do in the way of foolishness and wine, and just back off. Who can eat or can enjoy more than I? I don't think anybody could. For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight, but to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. And in chapter 3, he goes on and talks about a time for various things to happen. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant. I won't take the time to go through that, but go back and read chapter 3 and through 1 to 9 or 10. And then he says in verse 9, what has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which sons of men are occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hearts. Those of you who listen to me hear me say quite often, I don't believe people that say there's no God, there's no accountability, there's no life after death, that man dies like a fly hit with a fly swatter. No, God has put eternity in our heart, except that no one can find out the work that God does from the beginning to an end. We really never get to the place that we know all about it. But it is a fact that it is that we know better. He goes on. I think I'll stop here, but he winds up. This is the conclusion of the whole matter. Ecclesiastes 12, verse 14. This is the conclusion. You want to have an abundant life? Fear God. That means respect Him, obey Him, honor Him. Doesn't mean cower from Him. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is man's all. This is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every single thing, whether good or evil. The conclusion, fear God and keep His commandments. He also tells us to remember our Creator, young people, to remember our Creator in the days of our youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh that say, I have no part in them. Solomon proved beyond a reasonable doubt to me, and I think he will to you if you'll stop and meditate on it, that things, folly, acquisitions, involved in activities, getting knowledge, involved in pleasures, fun, devoting our life to fun, that's not how to have an abundant life. It doesn't give us love, hope, and peace. But to fear God and keep His commandments as whatever portion of his commandments apply to you or to me. They're not the same for you and me as they are in the Mosaic law. But keep what he tells us to do. In other words, this is man's all. And then we can have peace and joy and love in our hearts and in our minds. And that will enable us to have an abundant life. I'll close there. And again, I encourage you to go back and read through the book of Ecclesiastes. Read the parts that I didn't go over. I may come back and hit it again another time. But to me, there's a lot of very, very applicable, practical exhortations and wisdom relevant to everyday life of people that live right here in the good old United States of America or any other country for that matter. May the Lord bless you. Goodbye.